Welcome to Brass Birmingham.
Indeed. So, in this game, we are going to immerse ourselves in what's arguably the most important event in recorded human history. I mean, you could argue that figuring out how to tame fire was kind of important, and farming was important, but the Industrial Revolution was hugely important. I mean, everything as we look around about the lives we live in the developed world has to do with the consequences of this Industrial Revolution. If we look before here, say about 1700, 1750 or so, human beings had lived the same way for thousands of years. You take somebody from 800 AD, or even a couple of hundred BC, stick them in a time machine and plop them out in 1800, they'd pretty much recognise everything they saw around them. People mostly lived pretty much the same way. You put someone from 1800, stick them in a time machine and pop them out in 1900, the world is totally different. There are things they can't even imagine going on and being taken for granted all the way around them. The shock of that change is, I think, what makes this such a big deal. And one statistic that always stuck in my mind that helps bring it through. If you went to Constantinople in the middle of the Roman Empire and you were a skilled workman, something like a weaver, it would take you 3 hours to earn enough money to buy a loaf of bread.
Wow.
Go to 1800, skilled weaver in Nottingham, you can do it in about 2 hours. In 1900, it takes you 15 minutes. That's the difference. And now about 5 minutes. That's the difference of how the whole wealth and economic cycle of things shifted with the Industrial Revolution. And in this game, we are essentially playing the role of industrialists who will make all of this stuff happen. So, what are we looking at with this board over here? The centerpiece, of course, is this map. Rather gorgeously
Illustrated,
map.
yes, it
Beautifully
is.
illustrated map of the Midlands. It says Black Country on it, but that's actually a bit misleading because the Black Country is really only this area here. The triangle of towns, Wolverhampton, Walsall and Dudley. I was born in Walsall and I grew up about here, on the Wolverhampton side of Walsall. I went to school in Walsall. My mother worked as a cashier in a cinema in Wolverhampton, and I spent a lot of time on the 529 bus route between those two towns. As we look at the rest of this map, I'll give you a bit more information about it. So I said the Black Country is right here in the centre. Here, this bit around Stoke-on-Trent is called the Potteries. And it's called the Potteries because that's where a hell of a lot of ceramics and pottery work was made. Wedgwood began his great pottery there. Wedgwood was the first real pottery to really take a lot of the ideas, some stolen, some sort of reverse engineered from China and some very new techniques, and developed those. And he really brought some kind of ceramic ware to the masses. Masses meaning middle class, not necessarily everybody, but certainly a much wider degree of pottery available to people because of what Wedgwood and his competitors and followers did near Stoke. Over here we see Derby. I want to stress the pronunciation here. It's Derby,
yes.
not Derby. Just up here from Derby, there's a little town called Cromford, and that's where Arkwright did the first water-powered cotton mill in the world. And Arkwright began his factory system there, where if you were a factory worker, you would be on one of two 13-hour shifts. None of this namby-pamby 8-hour day rubbish. This was 13 hours or so. Here in Burton, it was famous particularly for beer. The water around here was particularly good because it came from the limestone areas around Matlock and the like. Coventry was well known for clocks and became a notable industrial city, but the biggest city of the area is Birmingham. This was known as the City of 1,000 Trades. This is where Bolton and Watt set up their factory to produce steam engines, where Matthew Bolton would say to people, "What I have to sell you is what all men desire, power." And that's why Birmingham is kind of at the centre of all of the things that you see here. The Black Country, if you look at the map these days or looked at aerial pictures, you would see no difference between Birmingham and the Black Country. It's all melded into one urban area. But the Black Country is a distinctive area with a distinctive accent. If you talk to people from the Black Country, they sound completely different from people from Birmingham, even though it's only 10 miles apart.
Yeah, you were telling us about that earlier today, how distinct the differences are.
Exactly. It's really quite staggering. The Black Country is called that. It basically refers to a saying from an American, and the American consul in Birmingham, Elihu Burritt, who came up with the phrase, black by day, red by night. And it's black by day because of the smoke from the blast furnaces, red by night because of the fires of the blast furnaces. When they produced this map, they call it the Dayside Map. Really, it ought to be the same as the Nightside Map on the other side, because there would be a pall of smoke over this whole area.
Right.
In the old curiosity shop, Dickens described it rather less romantically. He said the smoke poured out, the factories poured out their plague of smoke, obscured the light, and made foul the melancholy air. And that gives you a nice feel for what it must have been like in those days. So that's the map, the centerpiece of the board. Around the board, however, there are quite a lot of gameplay qualities. So on the outside, we see a track which will record both victory points and income. Income is marked by the circular markers, victory points by the hexagonal markers that Vanna is pointing out to you. They both will appear on the same scale, and we'll see how that works as we go into more details. Over here there will be cards. There's some cards here. The main deck of cards will appear over here. In fact, it is about to magically appear there. Over here we see the iron and coal markets, and this is now two of the resources that are very important in the game. Iron is orange, coal is black. We have some more iron and coal cubes off the side. The other resource that appears in this game, and does not appear in the Lancashire version of this game, is beer, and those are shown by the beer barrels. Also on the edges of the map we see connections to the outside world, the outside merchants. Oxford here for the River Thames and connections to London and out that way. Gloucester, which takes you down to the River Severn, Bristol, and off that way. Shrewsbury, or Shrewsbury, people argue endlessly about which way you're supposed to pronounce that, heads off. I'm imagining towards Holyhead and the ports for Ireland and off that way. Warrington here would be a nod towards the Mersey and the Trent and Mersey Canal, which was one of the first major canals that was built here. And Nottingham off towards Yorkshire and the east of the country. And these merchants here, as we'll see, is where we sell our stocks to as we go on. Then, as well, around the main board, we have the individual player boards. These player boards have the industry markers. You'll see a whole bunch of industries, which I'll describe in greater detail. And then also these things here, which are connection markers for rail and canal links. The purpose of the game, if I boil it down really crudely, is to get these onto the map. You'll score victory points. It's a victory points scored game, but all the victory points that you score will be based on the industries and links that you manage to place on the map, exactly how you place them, how they are in connection to everything else. That's what matters for winning this game. One other thing on the decorations I didn't mention, over here is the player order. Player order manipulation is an important part of this game, and as part of that you see little figures on that correspond to the colours. So orange here, we have
Sir Arkwright.
Mr. Arkwright, yes.
Yes.
And all of the figures are historic pictures of people from the time. Roxley did actually quite a good job of finding a couple of women. One of the reverses is also a woman. Because of course at this time women couldn't even own property. And so actually finding a couple of factory owners. And in the rules there's a nice little biography of each of them, which is a fun little thing to read if you don't want to go over to Wikipedia. So that's the map of what we have. Next, we will go into the description of the game, and I'm going to do this in two parts. My first part, I'm going to basically explain how these things go onto the map and how they interact, the industries, the links, and the resources. And we'll talk about the interaction between those. And then in the second part, I'll actually go through the turn orders, what you do in what order, and things of that kind, because it's much easier to explain that once you've actually got the understanding of how these industries and links go. So we'll begin with the straight industries, and we'll flick to Edward's little personal camera here. So what we see here are a number of different types of industries. There are breweries, there are manufactured goods, often referred to as crates because that's the symbol. There are cotton from cotton mills, there are coal mines, there are potteries, and there are ironworks. These come in two broad categories. The coal mines, the ironworks, and the breweries all produce resources that we'll use during the game: the iron, the coal, and the beer. The other three, the potteries, the cotton, and the manufacturing goods, all are producing finished goods that will be sold on later on. So let's begin to see how this might work. So Edward, could you toss me your lowest coal mine, please?
Absolutely, sir.
And let's imagine Edward has built a coal mine here in Coalbrookdale. And give me a couple of pieces of coal, please, to help me with this. When he puts a coal mine down there, he always puts 2 bits of coal on top of it, because if you see, there are 2 little coal markers in the bottom corner here, and that indicates 2 bits of coal go on it. If you go to his player board, you'll see that just on the side here of the coal mine, it indicates that it will cost him 5 quid. And we will use poker chips. These are actually the poker chips that come with the deluxe version of the game, are purchasable separately.
And currently available on Kickstarter by Roxley, as
Indeed.
it just so happens.
I am going to be spending more money than I really ought to on these chips later on. I do strongly recommend having some kind of poker chips for this or any other economic game. It makes handling money so much easier. I was not of that opinion until I started watching Heavy Cardboard, but I became completely converted after trying them out. So let's imagine Edward is here with his iron, and I want to build an ironworks. Now, if you look at the ironworks, we'll look at Edward's board, because it's there. The bottom level ironworks on his board.
Oh, I'm sorry, Ironworks. Sorry,
Yep.
yes.
It says you need 5 money,
And?
but also a coal. So if I want to place my ironworks here in Coalbrookdale, while I have to pay the money, I also have to take coal. I will take that coal from Edward. He doesn't have any choice in the matter. He'll be quite pleased, in fact, for reasons that will soon become clear, but I've done that. And then I will place 4 iron cubes on there, because there are 4 iron cubes that are indicated. Now, making an ironworks in Coalbrookdale is particularly thematic, because it was in Coalbrookdale that Abraham Darby put together really the first business that made iron based on coke or coal rather than charcoal. Before this happened, if you wanted to make iron, you had to get the right fuel for it, you had to have charcoal, which obviously comes from woods. You need a forest nearby. It's a complicated process to process the wood down to charcoal, and it's a right pain in the backside to get the iron together. Actually, very close to where we're broadcasting here is the first ironworks in America, in Saugus. And it was a big deal that they could actually make their own nails and not have to import nails from England. So iron was really difficult to make because it's relied on charcoal, and it relied on the energy of, in Saugus's case, a water wheel. What Abraham Darby did is he figured out how to make it from coke, which is basically a processed coal. Other people in Europe did it as well, but he was the first one to really make a sustainable business from it. And this is what really helped fuel so much of the Industrial Revolution, because they were able to have relatively easy access to iron. The first cast irons for railways came out of this plant. This was before steam engines. This was when railways were just a horse-drawn carts on rails. Also, a particularly important thing on this was the first ever iron bridge. Now, the town where it is just called Iron Bridge. And you see this big iron bridge going back to 1781. And it's a weird looking bridge to look at, because they didn't know how to build a bridge in iron in those days. So they built it the same way they build a wooden bridge. And so it just looks how they would do a wood bridge, and it's all in iron. But over time they realised this iron bridge stood up much better. It was a big storm that knocked down every other bridge on that river, but not the iron bridge. And so the iron bridge is there. And ironwork, particularly decorative ironwork, went all over the world. If you're in Christchurch, New Zealand, and you see the Peacock Fountain, it came from Coalbrookdale and Darby's original plant, but still ran until just a couple of years ago. Or at least some kind of plant on that site. So, back to my ironworks. I build the famous Coalbrookdale Ironworks. I've taken some of Edward's coal. And I said Edward would be pleased by me doing that.
Yes, sir.
Why is he pleased? Because at some point, somebody else, maybe Edward himself, will use the other bit of coal. And when he's used all the coal, an important event occurs. He flips the tile over the other side. What does this mean? In game term means you see 3 little markers on it.
And here, I'll bring it over here so folks can see
Yep. In the bottom corner, there's a circular marker with a 4 on it, which is income. And that means he immediately goes 4 up the income track. So, yes, please,
there you go.
one of my assistants, send him 4 up the income track. In the other bottom corner, you see a hexagon.
Sorry. Okay.
And that hexagon indicates how many victory points he will score when we get around to victory point scoring. Notice again, circles are for income, hexagons are for victory points. And in the top corner, you'll see a couple of link marks. That will indicate victory points that somebody will score based on their connections into Coalbrookdale. So that's perhaps a good time to talk about connections. So do put the tile back and we'll see it in its flipped state. So if we look at connections, you'll see that connection tiles come in 2 varieties. There are canals and railways, and they're just on the other side of each other. And this follows the flow. One of the main things about the flow of this game is that we'll build, over the first part of this game, a network of canals all across this area. Then, halfway through the game, we will get rid of them all and build railways instead. And that really fits the theme of what happened in this era, is because there was a big canal network built of great excitement. There was big canal mania and all the rest of it. And then the steam train came and those canals were pretty much obsolete. So let's look at how the canals fit into the picture. So let's take one of, actually I'll take one of Jess's canals, actually, for this example. Let's imagine Edward didn't build his coal in Coalbrookdale, he built it in Wolverhampton. And so I'll put the things on. And I want to build my ironworks, not in Coalbrookdale, but in Walsall, because, you know, I feel a fondness for home.
Right. It seems fair.
How can I do this? Well, I can't, because I can't get access to coal unless somebody has built a canal, the canal between Wolverhampton and Walsall. Now, these canals then allow us to do several things. But before I go into that, let me tell you a little bit more about these canals. The canals that were built across this area and all over England are relatively narrow by traditional canal standards. And in fact, the boats that were used on them are called narrowboats. They're narrow in that they're only 7 foot wide and 70 feet long. So they're very long, thin boats. And they were made that way because that way they could fit on narrow canals. They were, at the beginning of this period that we're talking about, they would be towed by 1 horse. And the great advantage of a canal would be that 1 horse could tow 10 times as much weight on the canal boat than they could on a horse and cart. And that makes a big difference. When the...
Oh, no, I was just going to say, if you've ever played the game Rochefort or the first game in the Cole trilogy, that's actually shown in that game, that they're actually towed through the canals.
Yeah. And it made such a difference that when the first canal was, in this era, was constructed from Worsley to Manchester, which is sort of up here in the north, the price of coal in Manchester dropped by a half. And that shows the impact and why, therefore, canals became popular. And there's a huge canal mania in the 1790s, sort of up towards about 1810, of building canals left, right and centre. In game terms, however, the first thing canals will do 3 things for us. The first thing they will do is they allow us to move goods. So if I want to get coal from Edward's coal mine in Wolverhampton, I need a canal connection to get it here. Then I can do the whole thing and the whole stuff and all the flipping can go on. However, I don't need it for all movement of goods. Iron, for instance, doesn't need canals to move. And the reason for that is that at this time they built these enormous magnets, and you just hold up a piece of iron, it would shoot hundreds of miles across the... You're not buying that. Well, actually what happened is there were roads at this time. In fact, there were fairly good roads, turnpike roads. And when we're looking at iron here, we're not talking about raw iron ore. We're not even talking about iron ingots. We're talking about finished bits of iron machinery, pumps, machine tools, whatever it was required for. And that is stuff that's high value, and therefore it makes economic sense to move by road. So iron in this game moves by road, which means it completely ignores the networks of canals and railways. If I was later wanting to build a brewery, which requires iron over here, then I just take the iron.
From anywhere on the board.
Yeah, it doesn't matter. Coal, however, I need the links. But it doesn't matter whose links they are. I can use any combination of anybody else's links to move goods. So as we get into that, I should also bring in the role of this market here. So this market describes what's going on with iron and coal outside of the world of the Midlands. So if I wanted to build my ironworks, let's go back to building the ironworks in Coalbrookdale. I can build it if there's a canal link to Wolverhampton to use Edwards coal, but I could also have a link out here to Shrewsbury. There we see this little double arrow link symbol indicating it connects to the market. Now I can buy coal from the market instead of taking coal from Edward. I do have to pay some money in order to do that. Now, however, the general rule is if I can take coal for free, I must. So if there is a canal link to Wolverhampton as well as a canal link to Shrewsbury, I don't get the option. I have to take it from Edward because it's so much cheaper to buy it from Edward. I would never bother doing it from outside. And that, of course, is good for Edward because that leads to the flip.
Over.
The thematic reason, by the way, for these flips is that when you flip your industry tile, it means you've got a going concern, a running business, because that movement of a coal cube isn't taking a big lump of coal, it's setting up a contract. He's saying, I'm going to supply your ironworks with coal, and we have an ongoing contract. Edward needs 2 of those contracts to make his mine make money. I need 4 similar contracts for iron goods to make my ironworks a going concern. And that's, of course, one of the key things about what made Abraham Darby successful in Coalbrookdale and the other people in Europe unsuccessful. He was able to actually get those contracts up, building up a business around him to sustain his iron business, and the other ones were not. So with coal, you must take coal, and indeed with iron, you must take from the board if it's available on the board. If it isn't available on the board, you can take it from the market. If with coal, you always need a connection by canal or rail. With iron, you don't need any connection at all. Beer is nicely confusing between the two. With beer, if it's your own beer, then it makes economic sense to move it by road, hence the little top hat and no symbol. However, if it's somebody else's beer, then you need the canal or rail connection. So that's movement of goods in terms of resources. But also canals are important for finished goods as well. Let's imagine I build this rather nice manufacturing plant here in Wolverhampton. I've got to sell these manufacturing goods to the outside world. In Shrewsbury, we see there's a merchant that wants manufactured goods, shows there by the crates. In Warrington, they want cotton. In Nottingham, they want pottery or cotton. In Oxford, they want, what's hidden behind there, manufactured goods. And Gloucester, they'll take any old stuff in Gloucester. In order to sell my manufactured goods to Shrewsbury, I've got to have canal links. And again, when moving goods, whether they be finished goods or resources, it doesn't matter whose boats they go over. Just the fact that I have some kind of connection is enough. However, what I will need is beer, because I've got to somehow deal with the thirst of all the workers. And they weren't drinking water in these days because water was full of all sorts of nasty stuff, especially cholera. And so nobody would drink water. And so you have beer, because beer is effectively processing and killing the germs that go in the water. It was much weaker beer in those days than it is now. No 10% double IPAs in those days. But it was still alcoholic. But that's what you needed in order to be able to live and drink. And so we need to supply beer. So when we do come to want to move that, those manufacturing goods to Shrewsbury, we will need to identify some beer from somewhere, and according to the necessary rules, either following the canals if it's somebody else's, or anywhere if it's mine, before that can also flip and we have a manufacturing business that's working. So that gives you, I think, some of a sense of how the network moves in terms of moving goods. But there's something else that these connections work for. The connections, as you've seen so far, don't matter whose they are. But obviously it does matter because we've got our colours on them. And the first reason why it matters is defining what's referred to as a player's network. If Edward is, say, we'll take back this case here, and Edward wants to build some industries or do further canals, he must have a connection, one end of the new canal that he's going to build has got to be in his network. Walsall counts as being in his network because the canal reaches Walsall, so he can build to Birmingham. If this wasn't here, he wouldn't be able to just drop the link between Walsall and Birmingham. Similarly, at least some of the time, and we'll see the details later, to build industries, he may need Walsall to be part of his network, or may not. And we'll get into the details of that when we get into the building of industries. But the network is wherever you have an industry, or wherever you have one end of one of your connections. And at some points in the game, this will become quite important, and you can get some blocking behavior going on as well. And then the third valuable thing about a connection is that it matters in terms of victory points. Let's move Edward's canal back over here. When we score for victory points, we will in fact do so at the end of the canal era when we wipe the board and replace it with railways. Before we do, we will score these canals. And we score the canals according to these network link victory point markers here. So this canal, under this circumstance, would be worth 5 victory points. So it would be really rather valuable.
1, 2, and 2. Just spell that out.
Just spell that out. Similarly, this one here would be worth 1, 2, 3, because there are victory points actually marked on the external links. So the connections give you 3 things. They allow you to move goods, for which you ignore who owns the connection, and they allow you to indicate your network's presence, which does matter who it owns, and to score victory points, where it does matter who it owns. And then the last thing I want to say about the industries is that when you build industries, you have to follow the levels that they show. There's a kind of technology progression going on here. You have to build level 1s before you can build level 2s, before you can build level 3s within each industry. So I can build a level 2 brewery when I've still got level 1 cotton out. That doesn't matter. But in order to build that level 2 brewery, I have to have built out by level 1 breweries. And obviously, as you go up in level, the industries become more powerful. And as we'll see, there's 2 ways to get rid of the lower level industries. One is to build them onto the board. The other is for a special action called developing that we'll get to as we go through the actions. So that, I think, is kind of the basics of how the industries and connections and resources work. Hopefully we'll give you enough to see how that fits together with the actions that I'll spell out in a moment. One of the things to really stress from all this is this degree of competition and cooperation. To succeed in this game, you can't kind of turtle in a corner. You have to be using other people's resources and making your resources available for other people to use.
Symbiotic.
Yeah, and that's kind of one of the magical things about this game system, is that it encourages this back and forth. I should also perhaps mention at this point, for some people that are on the stream that may not be familiar with Brass generally, the original Brass game came out in 2008, and it's set in Lancashire, which is kind of up this end of the map. And it was a very successful game, very highly rated on Board Game Geek. And then before 2018, they decided to do what I think of a sibling version, which is Birmingham. The rules are similar. We still have the canals and railways. A lot of what goes on is the same. We don't have beer in the Lancashire version. The 2 are very similar games that have this quality. But
kind of a family of games.
Two very much related games. But you will hear people talk about the difference between Birmingham and Lancashire. The original game was not called Brass Lancashire originally. It was just called Brass. And if you read anything older that talks about Brass, they'll be talking about Brass Lancashire. But when they decided to come out with the Birmingham version, they decided to make it easier. You'd have Brass Lancashire, the original, and then Brass Birmingham. And Roxley, who produced Brass Birmingham, also reprinted Brass Lancashire to the same rather lovely standards. And while we're talking about lovely standards, I should point out that these buildings on the map are all real buildings. This church here is St Matthew's Church in Walsall. We would have a school speech day once a year in which we all be trooped in for a church service. It's the only time I ever went to a church service at that age or since. But that is a real place. Here we see Dudley Castle, which is now mostly a zoo. These are all, I can't identify all the buildings for you, but they're all based on real
We'll let it slide this time, Martin. All right. All right.
So now I've given you the core concepts of the game. Let's go into the actual sequence. So in the game, we will all have a hand of cards. We'll all have, based on having 8 cards, and we will take turns, and in each turn we can take 2 actions, each action of which will cause us to lose a couple of cards. And then to help going through this, I'm going to point you out this player aid. This does not come in the box, unfortunately. Edward's going to look at it in more detail. It's available on BGG. This is a beautifully produced game. I have one problem with it. The player aid that comes with the game on the card is just not good enough in my view. This one that comes on BGG gives a lot more detail and allows you to summarise the game really well. So I'm going to follow this player aid with the
printed this off. Forgive the color things on my printer, but yeah, you can print this off, laminate it, the whole 9 yards. I didn't want to laminate it. That way it doesn't glare for you guys when we showed it off.
Right. So we will do 2 actions in each turn. The actions are build, sell, loan, scout, develop, and network, as shown on the player aid.
You know what I'll do? I'll go ahead and bring this back up here, and I'll zoom in here on the player aid so folks can kind of follow along with that, okay?
Okay. So build is the action by which you place your tile on the map. So the first thing you want to do is you want to find some nice spot that you might want to build. For instance, you might say, oh, I fancy building Ironworks in Derby. In order to do this, the place has to have the right kind of icon. So I can build an Ironworks in Derby, I cannot build one in Burton-on-Trent. Sometimes you see some of these icons are paired up, like the brewery and a cotton mill. When you get a choice of a paired up and a non-paired up, like here, you have to pick the non-paired up one first.
So you can't just block just to be...
Yeah, I can't just go, oh, first manufacturing goods in Stoke, I'm going to do that to block the cotton mill. You've got to, this one has got to be used here before we can use that one.
Roger that.
In the Canal Phase of the game, I can only build 1 industry per town, per person. So if Edward can build in Wolverhampton, I can build... If it was... I'm going to go tangle up, aren't I? Looking for the right example spot. But say here, Colebrookdale. It's got an empty spot for another Ironworks or brewery, but neither me nor Edward can build this slot. It has to be built by somebody else. During the rail era, once we've cleared all the canals away and put railway lines down, then we can have multiple industries in the same city. But during the canal area, that's not possible. You'll notice there are a couple of spots here and here where there's no town. Those are called farm breweries. And we'll talk about how that works in a second. So I need a slot of the right kind. I then need the right card to build in that spot. And there are 2 kinds of cards that we can see here on the map. Here for us, and I'll put 2 down. On the left, there is a location card. There it says Derby. And the location cards are colour-coded to the locations on the map. Now, I don't need the colour codes. I know where all these towns are. But everybody else here is going to struggle. So basically, you look for the colour on the card and you look for the colour block. So Derby here is greenish. And if we look at the Birmingham card, for instance, that's purpley. So it shows in the part of the purple block. So use the colour blocks to help you spot where they are on the map. With the Derby card, I can build any industry that's legal to build in Derby, which is nice. And that allows me to build right there in Derby. The other kind of card that we see on the other side, on the right, is a industry card, and that's an Ironworks industry. And you can see from the icon in the top corner that that's an Ironworks. That allows me to build an Ironworks, but it only allows me to build an Ironworks in places that are within my network. So if I haven't got some kind of link coming into Derby, then I'm not going to be able to build using the Ironworks card in Derby. I'm going to have to use the Derby card. The one exception to that is if I have nothing on the board at all, which will be the case at the beginning of the game. Then I can place an industry with an industry card anywhere. But that's only at the beginning of the game, or it might happen at the beginning of the rail era if I've been playing really badly. So I need an open slot. I need the right card, either the location or the industry card. Because farm breweries don't have a location on them, I can only build those with the brewery card.
Right, because there's no location. Makes sense, right?
Exactly. Then I choose the lowest level tile on my board, and I pay the money. I look for the resources. So if it's, again, if it's an Ironworks, I'm going to need a connection to coal somewhere. So I'm using Ironworks as my example. Connection to coal, which in this case can either come out from a canal to Nottingham. I then, once I'm done, I then place the cubes on there if it's a resource, beer, iron or coal tile. And that's the basics of building. There are a couple of little exceptional points. The first is, as well as building iron in Derby on an empty slot, I'm also allowed to build a higher level industry on top of one of my own industries. That's called overbuilding. That might happen later on in the game because I'm desperate to build an Ironworks and there's nowhere else I can build. It's not something that's terribly common, but can happen. The other case when you can overbuild is should this iron market become empty, and I realised I didn't explain how the markets worked, but I will do, don't worry. Then I can overbuild somebody else's Ironworks instead. But that's the only case, and that doesn't happen terribly often, at least on the Birmingham map. At least it's not happened terribly often to me. So, what happens when I build my Ironworks? As I said, I will place 4 cubes there.
Gotcha.
But now I should explain a bit more about the markets. Here, the market has a couple of open slots on it. And what that means is if there are open slots on the market and goods can move to that slot, then they must immediately do so. So these 2 iron cubes will fill to those slots in the market, and I will be paid the value. In this case, 2 quid, 1 quid for each iron cube. The rest will then sit there. Now, when Edward builds his coal here in Coalbrookdale, if there's no link to any kind of market, then the coal will sit there, even if there's open slots in the coal market.
Because coal doesn't teleport, iron does.
Exactly. However, if a canal had been built by anybody to the link to Shrewsbury, then the coal would go and fill up the market. It only goes, however, if it's built and the coal is on there. If the coal appears first and then the canal appears later, it doesn't then move. It only moves when you immediately place it there. So that covers building industries. The next thing to cover on the player aid is the sell action. And the sell action is how we take these wonderful merchant goods and sell them. And it's very straightforward. You just look to see, have I got the necessary canal links to the appropriate buyer? I look to see if there's a source of beer. Now, it may be that I have my own beer. Maybe I've got this farm brewery over here and a beer on it.
I failed you, I'm sorry.
No problem. I didn't exactly give you any warning. In this case, I can use my own beer, which I'll probably want to do because that would flip my brewery. And
right.
Flipping is good. Flipping is what we want to have happen. However, if that wasn't available to me, in this case, I can use merchant beer. And I can use the merchant beer from here instead. I get a little bonus. Here, 4 victory points. If I use this merchant beer, I get 5 money. But there's only 1 beer per merchant. And the merchant beer can only be used for selling to that particular merchant. So if I was trying to sell and he'd already used his beer, I can't use some other person's beer, even if I'm connected to it. No, only the merchant I'm actually selling to. Do I'm able to use the merchant beer. The merchant beer will refresh at the end of the Canal era, but once it's used during Canal, it won't appear again for the rest of the Canal era. Once I've sold one manufacturing good, if I happen to have another manufacturing good lying around and it's got necessary connections to appropriate part of the outside world, then I can sell that again as part of the same action. So with a sale, you make each sale individually, but you can repeat it as many as tiles you've got to flip.
Of same or different kinds?
Different kinds. So you can sell crates and then sell cotton, whatever combination that you like. And that's often, of course, a common case. You want to kind of minimize your action usages, so you try and build up how many cells you can do in one action. But on the other hand, you're worried about the beer, so there's all sorts of panic and stuff can come in there. The next on the list, on our list from the player aid, is the loan. This is a Martin Wallace game.
Yeah, of course.
Money is going to be tight. You are going to need loans. The loan is really straightforward. You gain 30 quid and you go down 3 blocks of the income level. So now let's look at this income thing again. You'll notice when the income got raised 1, 2, 3, 4, it went up 2 income steps. The circular markers here are the income steps. These are the tracks. When you go down 3 income steps, you don't go down 3 because that would be nice. Martin Wallace is known for not being nice. You go down 3 whole blocks all the way down to -1 if you wanted to take a loan at that point. And that's fairly straightforward with the loans. You spend your money, you take your loan. You might know that in Lancashire, you were able to vary the amount of loan you could take, but people discovered that the only sensible thing to do was to do the full 30. So that's the only option you have in the Birmingham game.
Now, with there being 2 buckets or 2 within one, you always go to which one?
To the top one. So if I was up in 5 and I went down 3, we 1, 2, 3.
Even if you were at the bottom one?
Even if down at the bottom one, you still go 1, 2, 3. Good point, yes. And I realised something else I've neglected to say, both for this and the sell action. Whenever you do an action of any kind, whether it's building or not, you always need to play a card. However, for everything other than the build action, it doesn't matter what card you play. You can play any card you like and it has no effect. Which is, when I first read that, I thought, oh, that's going to make the hand management not a doddle, isn't it? Because it's only for builds that you have to care about what cards you have. Trust me. There will be much gnashing and wailing of teeth over hand management in this game, even though so many of them you can take whatever card you like. The next action is Scout. Scout is what you do when your cards are just not very good for you. You play your card for the Scout action in the normal way, and then you discard 2 other cards from your hand, and you pick up 1 of each of these 2 rather nice wild cards.
There you go.
There we are. The wild card on the right is the wild location card. It counts as any location, so it basically allows you to build any industry anywhere you like. A super wild, do anything card. The second wild card is a wild industry card. It allows you to build any industry, but only in your network. So it's not quite as good as the other card, but still pretty damn nice. Now, you can take the Scout action at any time. It doesn't cost anything, but you are not allowed to take the Scout action if you already have either wild card in your hand. So you've got to have played both of them before you do this again, if you're going to do a Scout twice.
And there's only 4 of each, so only 1 player can have each one.
Yep.
So there you go. You can't have duplicates.
Right. And in fact, it means we don't run out, because we can always do the Scout. The next action on the list is Develop. And Develop is very straightforward. Discard any card, and then you may develop away 2 of your lowest level industries. Any industry, any combination. I could develop a cotton mill and a coal mine, or whatever combo I like. And the cost is 1 iron cube per industry you develop away. The iron must come from the board if it's on the board. If it doesn't come from, and that then will be free. If there's nothing on the board, you will take it from the merchants and you will pay the merchant cost. No worries about moving stuff over the canals, of course, because iron travels by road.
Pay the iron cost.
Yes, you pay the iron price. Yes.
All right. Well, this is good. See you, everyone.
Exactly. And that's develop, that's nice and straightforward. One thing to watch, however, if we go zoom in on your board
I'll
there.
bring this back because this is an important point here, right here.
Two of those potteries, there's a little symbol that shows a light bulb with a do not do this symbol on it. That indicates you are not allowed to develop those potteries. They must be built, and must not be developed. And I'll come back to a couple of wonky things about potteries later on. Then, after develop, the last one to consider is the network action. So again, you play a card, any card, it doesn't matter, and you place a network on one of the paths shown. So if it's canal, I can place it where there's a canal symbol, or where there's a canal and rail symbol, but obviously not where there's a rail only symbol. For a canal, the cost is, it's on the board somewhere, over here, it is £3. And I can only play canals during the canal era. That's what that little symbol there means. In the rail era, I will spend money to do a train. And the basic cost of a rail is 5 plus a coal. So I have to be able to reach coal from one end or other of my rail line because it's a steam train. It ain't moving if there's no coal coming to move it. But also, during the rail era, I can do the double build. And the double build
Costs 15.
Indeed, costs 15, requires 2 coal, although they're made separately. So I build one, I have to have the coal for the other, then I build the other. So I can't, for instance, if I wanted to get from Burton to Derby, say, oh, I can do this and use merchant coal. I have to make sure that I have coal supply for here before I can build any further out. 2 coal, 15 money, and a beer as well. So that makes it a more expensive thing, but it does allow you to build 2 units of rail in one go, which is obviously rather handy. And those are the actions that we have. Oh, well, I'll remind you that to build a network, one end must already be in your network. So I can't just plonk down rail anywhere. It has to start from somewhere where I already have either network connections or industry.
Except for the first one, right?
Except for the first one. And that is another difference with Brass Lancashire. You are allowed to make your first play on the board be a network connection. In Lancashire, it had to be an industry. But in Birmingham, it can be an industry or a network connection. So those are the way you do. You get 2 actions. Some combination, any combination of build, sell, loan, scout, develop, network. You will discard 2 cards, 1 for each action, although the card's value only matters for the build. And then you get to the end of your go. At that point, you will take 2 cards, if there are cards in the deck. If there aren't any cards in the deck, then you don't take cards. We will continue playing until the last person has exhausted the cards in their hand, and then that's the end of the era. So, but before we get to the end of the era, we'll talk about the end of the round. We will all take turns in turn order, as shown in the turn order marker. When we play our cards to indicate our actions, one habit that I learned from the early heavy cardboard players, which was really helpful, is you place the money for your individual action on the card that goes with that action. So if I did a canal build that cost 3 and an industry build that cost 5, I will put a 5 on here and a 3 on here. And the reason it's better to do this is that it allows you to keep track of where you've been if you need to rewind. I learnt this trick from Edward. I also like to place any industries, any resources I use on there for the same reason. At the end of my turn, I then take all of my money and I place it on my turn indicator marker. Then we'll all take turns spending our money. And then at the end of the round, we determine turn order. Turn order is based on how much money you've spent. So whoever spent the least will go first. Whoever spent the next least goes next. But if 2 people are the same, they maintain their relative order.
There we go.
So it would do that. And that's how turn order marks. So we'll manipulate turn order based on what things we decide to do. Then once we've determined turn order, we get income or, just as likely, pay debts. So that will base on the income track here. So in this situation, Edward gets 2. If I'd been taking out a loan, I would pay 3. We do the income back and forth. If we can't pay our debts because we don't have enough money, it is a bad thing. You have to liquidate, you have to take a tile off the board and you get half the cost of that tile back. If you can't do that, you might end up losing victory points if you've got any to lose.
Just don't do that.
I have not actually seen anyone do this yet. And I say this as somebody...
Challenge accepted. All right.
You've got to do pretty badly to be at that point. But I just want to point out, just don't do that. Make sure you've got loans to cover your income. And that's the end of round, and then we rearrange a turn order and go on from there. But if that round meant meant that we all played our last cards, and as a result we've got empty hands, then we get to the end of the era. And the first thing we do at the end of the era is we score. We'll begin by scoring the links according to the link indications that I showed earlier on, using the hexagonal marker there to notch up the victory points. We will then score for the industries, showing the little markers on the industries, but only if they flipped. Remember, a flipped industry isn't a going concern, it's not a profitable business, nobody's going to give you victory points for having an unprofitable business. So you have to flip the tiles in order to get the points.
And just as a quick reminder to everybody, it's actually the backside of all of your tiles are shown on the player board itself, so you don't actually have to go and flip it over. So you see that this is going to be worth 10 points, $5, and has 1 rail connection on it. So.
Indeed. Thank you. Then at the end of the canal phase, we will remove all the canal connections. We will also remove all the level 1 industries because they've become boring and insignificant and totally out of date. We will reset the merchant beer, and then we'll take the cards, give them all a shuffle, and get ready for the next era. And actually, when I was looking at this game, this was actually one of the things I really loved, the fact that the canals all disappear for the railways, because the railways were a huge impact, even compared to the wonderful canal system that had been built up here. The real marker for the railway age, I feel, occurred further up north with the Liverpool to Manchester railway that was built in 1830. If you wanted to get from Liverpool to Manchester, it would take you about 3 hours on a coach and horses. And it was 3 really uncomfortable hours as well, because coaches and horses would be bumpy, they'd be full of dust, a really unpleasant way to travel. If you wanted to move your coal, it would take you about 12 hours for that canal boat to make its way along the canal.
That sounds wonderful.
It does, doesn't it? But on that railway line, once they got the Planet locomotives, they could do the journey in an hour. So that's a hell of a speed up, from 3 hours on a horse to an hour by train. Just think of it, in these days, you would do well to do 30 or 40 miles a day travelling. But once you got railways, you could do 30 or 40 miles in an hour. So
Far more efficient.
Far more efficient. And then you've also got speed of communications, because telegraphs appeared and they were strung up along the railway lines, and suddenly you could communicate quickly as well. So the railways really shrank our notion of how big things were. That was the impact that railways had. So you can see why we wiped the canals off the board, because they're just completely useless. Although, in fact, canals were still used in Britain to move goods. And in fact, the thing that apparently finally killed them off, I can easily remember, because it was a particularly cold winter in 1963, which was the year I was born. And my parents always told me about how cold the winter it was that year. And that caused a lot of canals to ice up and any goods to be stuck there. And that was apparently the final blow on the canals. So when I grew up in this area here, this canal doesn't go in a straight line like this. It kind of goes up through Bloxwich and round and down into Wolverhampton. That was, the local cut. You take a look at it, it was pretty bad. There was all sorts of stuff floating around in there. We, as a Boy Scouts, we were taught to canoe on the canal, and the instructions were, whatever you do not go anywhere in that water. Do not touch that water. It is nasty stuff. There were bits of all sorts of foamy substances on it. It was pretty nasty. But now, canals are in fact become a very popular tourist attraction in England. A lot of people do narrowboat holidays not necessarily in this area, but certainly out in the countryside.
Okay.
You'll rent a narrowboat for a week. You don't need a horse. You've got a nice little engine that will allow you to tug along. And as far as I can tell, the main appeal is it allows you to chug comfortably from pub to pub. And you don't have to worry about being drunk in charge because, hey, you're on a canal boat. So the canals are still around, being used for leisure though these days. So we'll do the railways, we'll repeat the whole era process again, we'll do the rounds, we'll exhaust the deck, and then we'll score again the same way, scoring for the rail links and for the industries. And here is the important point. If you get any level 2 or above industries built during the canal era, they will score both at the canal scoring and at the railway scoring. Double points. And that is one of the big benefits of trying to get stuff out in that canal era. And then we just score up the victory points. Whoever has most victory points wins. The tiebreaker is income and then cash, if we happen to get to a tie. I have never seen a tie on this show. Except the last time I played. So we'll see what happens. So we're almost done. I just want to finish, though, by pointing out a couple of things about the industries that are a little bit quirky. So if we go back to Edward's closed-in player board.
Yep, there you go.
And the reason I want to point this out is because some industry things are kind of weird. Now, the cotton mills are fairly straightforward. They're the same as they were pretty much in Lancashire. As you go up, the cotton mills give you more victory points, decreasing income, but really you're doing these primarily for the victory points. The manufacturing, on the other hand, does this really weird dance of different things. So sometimes you get 2 links for manufacturing, and sometimes no links at all. The costs vary quite wildly as well, and the ratios between victory points and income scoot around quite a bit as well. Figuring out how to best use this manufacturing track is one of the things I must admit I haven't got the clue of yet, but there we are. But the manufacturing is relatively straightforward compared to this pottery stuff, and this is what I really wanted to make sure I outlined. Notice the first level pottery is worth a lot of victory points, and also expensive. The second level pottery doesn't cost anything, and is worth really very little at all. And then the third level is humongously expensive, but worth a lot of victory points. That's a very strange rhythm that you've got going there, and the fact that you can't develop away your level 1 or level 3 pottery. Another weird thing is, if you look at all the level 1s, they're all marked with this symbol showing that it can only be built during the canal period. You can't build level 1 industries in general during canal.
And what happens if you still have them going into the railroad phase?
You have to develop them away with the develop action. Pottery, you can't do that. So you can build a level 1 pottery during the canal period. You'll also notice 1 or 2 of them have an indicator saying you can't build them you can only build them during rail, like the top level pottery here, although you'd be doing damn well.
I've yet to see that. Well done. Well done.
Exactly.
The game is yours.
Right.
Exactly. You're doing really well.
Right,
to do
yeah,
that.
there you go. All right.
But, so yeah, pottery's a little kind of weird that way. But there we are. Whew, I hope you didn't mind how long-winded I got there.
Oh no, that was awesome,
That was
and I, damn you, now the bar is set for the historical flavor. Yeah, I hope you all enjoyed that. So Martin is welcome to teach whatever games he wants to teach, but I am not going to be imparting that level of historical
He grew up
flavor.
there. I mean, you would have to like time travel and change your life to make that happen.
So there's that. So well done.